Hey, everybody, welcome to another Empire Business podcast. This is the podcast that gives you a behind the scenes inside look of Bald Move or Bottom Line, us making decisions, evaluating threats, evaluating opportunities, all that stuff.
Threats.
Today, we're going to be talking about advertising, which I got to say is like a weak area for us. Last year, if you remember, we had our buddy Joe on to talk about like the efforts that he did in the advertising. So we're going to build on that information. If you missed it, if you click on the Empire Business, the main article has a link to all the different Empire businesses, and you can just kind of go back there and see what's up. So ads last year we did better than we'd ever done advertising before. We got over $45,000 in advertising, and more than half of that was on the basis of the bonanza we had in Game of Thrones. We just had buku traffic. We had good ad buys. We had them sold for like almost every podcast, if not every podcast, including some instant takes, and maybe a spoiler podcast or two even. I think we even double booked one week, which is nice. I mean, like your average podcast, if you hear them, has 3 to 5 ads. We're way under the industry standards. And if you want to know more about that, you can, we'll touch on that a little bit, but a lot of that was covered last year. So we talked about, how the club is doing pretty well and maybe it's leveling off, but it's kind of hard telling. Our stats are down, or at least stagnant, but probably down. I don't think we'll sell as many this year as we did last year. And there's a reason for that. Number one, it just seems like our stats are down, and we've hinted at this in different other Empire Business podcasts. But what's happened is they've redone the way our statistics are calculated, and they've gone to a new formula. And unfortunately, Bald Move podcast, like the part of the formula was like they took the number of bytes that you've transferred for a show, and then they divide it by the size of what they consider an average podcast, and then they counted those up, and that's how many, whole shows or people that watch that listen to your show. And this year they're going to this thing from the internet advertisers or internet advertising buyers. The IAB is a standard. And it's standardizing like how all these different podcast hosts measure one set of ears listening to a podcast. And since our podcasts tend to be longer than whatever the average is, our podcasts are usually longer than that. We also saw some severe kind of like fall off in our traffic. The important thing to remember as we're having this discussion is it's not true that less people are listening to Bald Move podcasts. There is zero evidence that less people are listening to the podcast. I've made this analogy before, but it's like if you measure the room in Fahrenheit and then an hour later you measure it in Celsius, that number will be the same, but assuming everything else has stayed the same, the actual physical property of the heat didn't change. So, and how do we know that? We're going to consider some of our statistics. Like I want to compare one of the few shows that we've had that's kind of like been on an annual release schedule that's survived, that's come back. We have before and after essentially statistics is Better Call Saul. So in season right now, our latest episode 405 is the latest episode we have a full week's of stats on, which is what I'm going to be comparing. We had 11,981 people listen to the podcast. The season premiere, we had 11,994. So it looks like our growth, episode over episode for Better Call Saul is pretty stagnant, pretty flat. But if you compare that to last year, episode 310 got 45,169 people listening to it. That is almost exactly 4 times less than raw numbers wise than listen to our latest show. And also if you compare like the traffic for 301, the season premiere of season 3, that was 25,366. So we had quite a bit of growth last year that has apparently leveled off. You start thinking like, could the show itself be influencing this? So you start looking at the ratings for the show. Like last year, the ratings for the season premiere of season 3 was 4.06 million, and that's a combined stat that combines DVR and initial run and the +3 and all that crap. So these are all the same measurement, and they're all apples to apples. The season premiere for season 4 is at 3.18. So yeah, there is a little bit of decline there. Yeah. But the audience for like 405 is 3.52 million, which is a modest growth. But the episode before had 2.8 million, so it's kind of like bouncing. The audience statistics itself seem like they're pretty stagnant this year. But it's interesting because the thing that's interesting is that that Better Call Saul has been all over the map in terms of ratings. Like, for example, you know, season 1 had a 6.9 million premiere, and its finale had 5.76 people watching it. And our height that year had 29,449 people listening. But yet we come back, the season finale of season 2, they took a big hit on ratings and went down to 2.26 million, but we were getting 38,000 people listening to it. So here's where a show declines, but because our show increases in popularity amongst the pool of competition, I guess, we still are able to make gains. And I also know, just by like judging from feedback, judging from social media engagement, judging from foreign engagement, like there's nothing that says our audience has like gotten significantly smaller. And in fact, the numbers for Better Call Saul are much better in season 2. They're a little bit off of season 3. I feel like Better Call Saul's audience is stabilized and is actually growing a little bit again. So I mean, that the fact that we've never had a show up until these stat revisions where we came back and we had a smaller show than we left it. Well, that's not true.
Walking Dead, I think,
sometimes it does fall off. Like, for example, episode 210 of Better Call Saul is 38,000. Episode 301 only had 25,000 people listen to it. But by the end of the season, we were up to 45.
Yeah, you always get the off-season people who just don't come back for the next season, you know, or aren't watching it at the same time.
Yeah. So like, that's the thing that I'm trying to take you through the paces of like how we like evaluate stats and stuff. And like, this is a shitty situation because they've migrated us to the new stats package for not quite a year, about 10 months now, but we still only have access to the legacy stats. There's something they've been promising for a while, and I guess they're getting close to doing, the converting all the old stats into the new formula. Because right now we're just, you know, the best we can do is guess. Like, okay, you know, it's a psychological bummer to be able to show up to 46,000 people listening to it, and then you get 12,000, but you just keep telling yourself, like, you know, there's no indication on the club or indication on feedback or anything else that less people are listening to it.
Yeah, and I think these stats, unfortunately, are things you can only look at in retrospect and say, you know, how did the thing that happened, whether it be stats changes or audience change for the show, how did that affect us? You can only do in retrospect because you do get that drop off year to year, like from a finale to a premiere. It grows over the course of the season, and really you have to wait till the season is over to compare your stats at the end of last season to the end of this season.
Yeah, and it just sucks so hard that we had years and years of statistics built up, and we were getting things where we could start to model, and we started to get a couple of consistent years of the club, and then it's like, damn, every single time we think we're about ready to throw our hands around a big lasso full of data and start making meaningful predictions and stuff, something like this happens, and it's like, again, we're having faith that we're staying about the same, but you know, that's just a guess. We need to get their hands on the updated legacy statistics before we can say that for sure. Now, I also thought it'd be fun to do a comparison. These are the old version of the stats for Game of Thrones. Like our rewatch podcast, for episode 309, which is the last episode that we have stats for, we had 39,478 people, which is incredible that a 4-year-old season that's in the middle of a long hiatus, for a show that's in the middle of a long hiatus, is drawing almost 40,000 people. That's almost 4 times as many that's listening to the current season of Better Call Saul. It gives you an idea of like what a monster Game of Thrones is. And like the people that we reached with the first episode, 301, we had 74,000 people still not only set to subscribe but to auto download. In season 2, episode 10, we had 94,000. That's how many people we had left after the end of our last rewatch that we did immediately after season 7. We began that season at 201 with 198,000. So
it's interesting to see the rewatches have the opposite trajectory of the season.
Right. But it does. It's not surprising for me, for sure.
No.
And then, like, if you want to see some real eye-popping numbers, episode 610 of season 6. So season 6, episode 10, 441,000 people listen to that podcast, and the old statistics will measure, which is just fucking incredible.
Is that in the first week?
That's in a week, and you can see that, like, that's so much more than, like, even, like, that's 10 times better than Better Call Saul was at the exact same point in time with the exact same statistics. But we came back with episode 701, 700,000. We grew almost 50% in the off season. And then by the time we get to finale episode, we had week one totals of 985,000 people downloading it. Now, if these numbers are the same as Better Call Saul, then we're more like 250,000 actual people, which is still fucking incredible.
250,000? How so? You think it's a 4-to-1 drop off? I was under the impression that it was like 50%. I was looking at
Better Call Saul, and if Better Call Saul's a 4-to-1 drop off, and they're like, if anything, Game of Thrones episodes are longer on average, right? I mean, I don't know, because the instant cast kind of throws that off, but the instant cast also is not nearly as downloaded as the main podcast. You know, the instant cast and the spoiler cast are like a 25% fraction of what the main show is. So, I mean, I don't know, but my guess is, we're going to see a 4x drop off at least, maybe 5x even, which is still incredible. And it's still more than we've ever sold as far as advertising. We've never had a ad cap of 200,000. I think for Game of Thrones last year it was like 135, right?
I can't remember off the top
of my head. It's either 135 or 175. But that's interesting because if you recall, season 6, our max audience was 441,000. So keep this in mind, the advertisers were only willing to buy between 135 and 175,000. You know, we had more traffic to sell; they just weren't interested in buying it. So I just wanted to talk about it because these are things that directly impact our stats. Like, we sold a decent number of Westworld ads, which we were hoping would be like Game of Thrones, like at similar like benchmarks to Game of Thrones, but that show struggled to get over 40,000 people listening to it this year, and that's under new stats, so that's cool. And I think it was a drop off of the previous season, like 140,000. So that was like a third drop off, right? Am I doing that math right?
I think so.
So yeah, I mean, it sucked because we sold ads at like 135,000 cap, and so that sucks, right? Like, not only did we not sell as many slots as we did in Game of Thrones, but we also didn't hit those caps.
Well, I think we got fucked on Stranger Things too, because Stranger Things aired just after the stat update, and we kind of got blindsided by the whole stat update. Like, we didn't know ahead of time that we were going to be losing about 50% across the board as far as stats go. And I don't mean listeners, I mean stats, raw download numbers.
Yep, we went to Fahrenheit to Celsius.
Right, and so when we were talking with Sonos, I was pitching them, selling them the number 50,000 downloads on that. Or actually, no, I was selling them the number, I think 100,000 downloads. Optimistically, probably, but based on old stats. And so when the stats change came along and we ended up getting more like 50,000 downloads, I think that soured them on us a little bit.
That sucks.
I know. We really got fucked by that stats change because we were in the middle of cooperating our own ads. And we just didn't have the insight that we needed in order to properly estimate. And so when they look at it, they probably go, well, fuck, these guys can't deliver the numbers they're talking about.
I didn't know that. Did you actually hear? Are you just assuming that since they haven't gone back since?
No, I heard from Sonos. I was talking with them, and they said, yeah, we're not really interested. We didn't get the numbers that we were looking for on that. So I think we got hardcore fucked on that stuff. But what are you gonna do?
And that's the thing. Like, that's where they get you, because I want to, there's lots. lots to talk about these statistics. And my network then goes into like stuff I glean from like some of the Nielsen metrics, and then some of the things we got from vendor and podcast perspectives from the podcast movement. And then we're going to go back to kind of like Bald Move, but just like keep in mind these kind of stats discussions, as because it's going to inform, you know, your kind of point of view for the rest of the stuff. So,
but before we move on from this whole stats thing, can we talk about maybe like how that directly affects the ads, right? Because I don't know how much people know about advertising sales, but there are caps that you put on your budget. Essentially, you say, okay, this show gets, like you said earlier, 400,000 downloads on Game of Thrones, and we're selling about 150,000 of those downloads that they pay for, and then the other 250 have been gravy so far for them. So, you know, when our stats get cut in half or a third or a fourth, whatever, and we sell 125,000 cap and we hit, you know, maybe 100,000 downloads or 70,000 downloads, they don't pay for anything beyond the actual number of downloads we got. So like there's a low end cap, which is the actual numbers. There's a high end cap, which is an artificial cap that we set on it and they pay for so that they can budget, that kind of stuff. And so it's weird to me, like the one thing I noticed when the stats changed is that some of our caps changed and some didn't. So like, and I think they did that based on the numbers that they saw and kind of the oversales that they saw. So like Bald Move TV, for example. I
was about to make the same guess.
Yeah, so Bald Move TV, for example, like we were barely hitting the numbers that they were talking about. We were selling like 12,000, I think, cap on that show, and we were hitting like 12 to 15 routinely. When the stats change happened, they dropped that cap down to 7,000, and we hit about 7,000 each week with Bald Move TV. Now, that didn't apply to Game of Thrones. We kept the exact same cap even when the stats change happened at 125, because I think they knew that even with the stats cut in half, we were still going to hit those numbers.
Right.
So it's weird. We're actually, I think we talk about this later, but we're giving the same amount of value and they're paying us half as much on some of these shows.
Yeah. So like it's interesting because Bald Move TV, one of the things what you've been trying to do the last few years is build that up, because when we started Bald Move TV, like 3 years ago, Bald Move TV got about 2,500 downloads if we put anything out there, right? We've now built that up. Like I think a year ago we were averaging 7,000 to 8,000 downloads, and now we're up to, and we're up, and keep in mind these are also pre-changeover numbers. We're consistently pulling 10, 12. So that's cool. Like that's something, like honestly, we're one of the things we're trying to push back with our advertising vendor is like, hey, you know, because they've always said like, well, you guys are seasonal and it's hard to line up and blah, who knows? And like, okay, hey, we have built this show into something you can sell week in and week out. We've always got something television related we can talk about. And one of our strategies is to continue to build up Bald Move TV and, you know, try to get something out like every other week at least. And like, you know, the last obviously several weeks we've been doing weekly content of like tentpole type shows, which seems like it's been successful for us. Like I doubt we would have gotten more, especially downloads on Sharp Objects, if we had just created a I don't know, it's hard to say. Sharp Objects is kind of phenomenon. Maybe we lost out on search engine optimization on that stuff, but I don't know. Like I said, we're trying to build up Bald Move TV so it's something we can sell ads for just all year round to kind of provide a stable base of income. All right, so we talked about the Nielsen metrics in some of the podcast movement. I don't want to repeat too much of that, other than like, you know, where the growth was surprising, because a lot of the growth in the last 5 years is driven by minorities, which is a good thing for us because we tend to be friendly for those communities and try not to have our head completely up our ass with it. But it also, you know, we're two white straight guys. Like we don't have any like real interesting takes beyond that, right? And it seems like the internet's hungry for these other sides, these other perspectives, these other stories, frankly. So like, you know, whatever. I'm just reporting the facts. Also, the other thing is, while podcast continues to grow, as far as like there's more shows with more audience, if you drill that down, that there's less new people to podcasting Like that's certainly still growing, but the real growth in the market is the avid podcasters are essentially switching more and more of their time watching television or listening to music or they're switching that more to podcasts. So like the average podcaster or average person listens to podcasts is listening to more podcasts and for longer amounts of time.
I think that's actually going to change in the coming years with like Spotify getting into the game. Some other companies,
points, yes.
Right? The inflection points that we talk about every single episode of this we do. I think that's going to change here because now the advertising is getting out there, right? Like Apple Podcasts was a thing that they never talked about. And so you kind of had to organically discover podcasts. Now it's being advertised to people who are listening to music, people who are watching television shows, you know? That's going to happen more and more.
Yeah, and it's, podcast has been more and more in the media spotlight. I agree between more people being, like, more markets being introduced to podcasts and, it's the best kind of growth you can have. The fact that, like, right now, the appetite for podcasts within the people listening to podcasts keeps increasing, which is good. So now if what we want to see is these stupid inflection points actually jack up the general audience. And if they, you get your mom listening to podcasts, she starts off on Serial and S-Town, but then she branches off into, I don't know, The Motley Fool or whatever, because she wants financial advice. But then she also knows that her favorite show is Better Call Saul, all these, so it's all good. Ideally, we want to see a little bit more outside growth. So this is because eventually a human body can only listen to so many podcasts, as I well know.
Yeah.
So like once the avid get to like their most fully ramped up, then you got to look for new bodies. The other good thing as far as advertising that Nielsen found out is the avid fans, these super podcast fans, actually spend more on the product categories, not just in like, we talk about the difference. There's multiple types of ad campaigns. There's awareness campaigns. There's brand recognition campaigns. There is bring people into the store to buy this thing, like, and there's different ways to do that. Like when Coca-Cola has polar bears at Christmas, they're not trying to get you into your local convenience store and buy a 12-pack of Coke. They want you to think about when you're at, when you're thinking about buying beer, you're thinking about picking up drinks for the relatives. They want Coke in your mind, right?
Yeah, or a movie theater when you're about to see a movie, right?
Exactly. And there's the science to that measurement. They've got various amount of techniques where they take a person that doesn't have any brand awareness and they have them listen to something or watch a commercial, and then they have them do other random tasks in the middle of a giant survey, and then they ask them questions about the brands and their opinions of it, and you can measure like the awareness of the brand and the perception of the brand and how that changes over large control groups and large sections of times. That's how they do like A/B testing to see what ads are effective. And it turns out that like podcasts are super effective. Like Nielsen concluded that there were, like in a comedy podcast genre, that there is an average brand awareness of 4% increase listening to just one 15-minute segment of a podcast with an ad sprinkled in it. And that's like 2 to 3 times higher than television and several times higher than like newspaper and print or print and like radio advertising. In business pods, like it's up to a 14% brand lift. And that again is way outperforms the classic kind of the forms of marketing. And this information, this is something that like Nielsen has been working on for like 3 to 4 years, and these stats just came out. So the optimism around podcasting right now is like we've always fantasized, like what does it look like when GM and Hyundai and Toyota and Pepsi and Coke and all those brands hit the market, Levi's and all that stuff, like start getting movie and television ads and things like that. What does that look like when that happens? And it's not a promo code to like, hey, get $1 off a 6-pack when you do. It's just like, hey, Coke is cool and it's advertised on a podcast. That's a huge money spigot, because right now podcast advertising by and large is limited to essentially a coupon that you get. And you have to take that coupon and they count the how many coupons, and then they do a analysis between how many ears it hit and how many people turned into coupons, and you did a good job or bad job based on that. And honestly, underselling our stats, I always wasn't too upset about, because I'm like, well, I'd rather sell them 100,000 hits of exposure and give them 400,000 and then get like twice the response they were expecting, because then they come back next year.
And that's exactly what I was talking about with Sonos, right? How they expected twice the traffic, they got half, and probably half the result too. So
right, so that didn't work in our favor. And you know, like you did, the strategy for that is you do that until you have all your inventory sold, and then you start ratcheting it up, because you got way too many vendors. You got to get some of the lower performing ones, or the ones that are on the fence, out to make room for new ones. But unfortunately, we still have massive amounts of unsold inventory, and the stat things happen. It's
and poor transparency too. I think one of the things that's going to make this better for everybody is if there's transparency in these ads, so that podcasters understand how effective their own ads are, right? Because I think that's super important. One of the things that always bugs me is like, I don't know if I sold 0 or 1,000 of your product. And so I can't look back at an ad and say, well, that was a bad ad, or that was a really good ad. So I don't have any way to tailor the way I pitch your product to my audience. And that's a huge problem. And one that the advertisers and the podcasters need to solve together.
So another way to look at how much brand awareness, or like changing in buyer behavior, Nielsen went on like a years-long study of consumer habits, where like the way they do this is like they give people like these special guns that they take to stores, and they go shopping with them, and it records how much they spend, and then they expose them to a stimulus, and then they see what the difference is, right? So we talked about the brand awareness lift, but like in TV and film, like the top categories are beer, pet care, tea, liquor, and candy. And they found that on average, podcast advertising increased beer spending by 14%, increased pet spending by 12%, tea spending by 11%, liquor 8%. Now, there's two categories that would fit Bald Move hand in glove there.
Yeah, you hear that, Jesse? We need some Lovecraft ads coming in here.
Yeah. I mean, like, who would not want to hear about a cool beer or a beer service, or like, you know, and that's even then, like, not even like that, like wine club shit and beer club shit, but just like a cool new liquor or something, or having that kind of advertising. Like, I think that would fit us really well, and if we ever start getting it, it'll do well. But that's why, like, you know, everyone's saying that podcasts are going to be like we've been treated with skepticism, and like it's not legit, and like none of these ads actually work, and we're now actually seeing that there's actually proof. Now we're going to continue to talk about this, but the other thing is, one of the reasons that they were so skeptical about all this stuff is because it's very hard to compare like podcast ads to like traditional FM and AM radio things, because almost no like personality directly reads those. You know, like you might have Harrison Ford pitching a product, but it's not like the local DJ. Sometimes they do, but it's not as often. And also, you don't get a 4-minute ad read on radio, where the host talks about their personal experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the next thing I want to talk about is the vendor perspectives I heard, because I went to a lot of different advertising panels, and there was a lot of like advertisers, direct advertisers, and also advertising firms like Midroll, and you know, what are they all? They're like Midroll.
There's Panoply has their own called Megaphone, I think. There's several others. Spreaker has Voxnet.
There's a bunch of them, and they're getting to be more and more nichier, which is cool. But from their perspectives, like they you know, they're like, yeah, this Nielsen data is good, but we really like what iTunes do, and we really love that like client side reporting. Yeah, because boy, if the customer is as goofy, and they usually are, they probably lets us tie their basic demographics data to that, or they might even let us tie their personal identifying data to that, and I can know how many people skip this ad and how many people listen to this ad, and like there's so much more than just you know, the Nielsen's sample size of data and raw statistics. Like they can really drive down to individual behaviors and see, you know, in a way that is kind of unprecedented, like how people interact with these ads and what the ads get skipped and all that. And that's going to be valuable information for them. And they're all clamoring for it. They all want it. Okay.
And it's going to be really good for the podcasters too, because like I was talking about earlier, tailoring your ads to your audience, that's invaluable information. How many people just skip through this fucking ad? You know, if I make it more entertaining, do less people skip? Right. And you know, it doesn't tie one-to-one directly to sales, but it's close.
You know, it's funny because they didn't talk about skip like the rates of skipping yet, but the stats that they did talk about is the average completion rate for a podcast is in the is between 80 and 90%. Which was, I guess, a surprise because I guess the industry assumed that there's a lot of people that just, you know, skip around or like something. They like to say like the fact that like the average person listens to the majority of the podcast was like a surprising finding to them.
I can actually tell you that ours is lower than that, but we have much longer podcasts than the typical
and we
podcast.
Also what are I'm going to guess because I don't know the answer to this. I'm going to guess we're somewhere in the low 60%.
It depends on the show, but yeah, I mean, it depends on the length a lot.
Right. But you know, the interesting thing about that is that like people, you know, we have a large feedback section and people self-report on the surveys that only two thirds of the audience see the feedback is important.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me that we're in the low 60s because a third of the audience is just like, yeah, fuck this. I want to hear Jim and Aaron, not the feedback. I think that's a mistake because some of the funniest stuff happens in the feedback.
Absolutely.
And what's hilarious is I'm getting a lot of feedback now from people that clearly don't listen to the feedback because they're like, you guys didn't speak about blah, blah, blah. And I think the best thing for us to do, and we've talked about this a long time, we put it off because it's frankly hard work, is to integrate feedback into the actual podcast body.
Right.
Because I think most people would listen to like the 4 or 5 most impactful feedbacks if we weaved a couple of sentences in like of a question or a theory, and then we like talked about it for a couple minutes in the context of the podcast. And like, you know, just reading an hour's worth of feedback, I don't know if that's something that is valuable. But I don't know, because the other thing is like, to the extent that's why we need another round of surveys. We'll probably be going out early next year, is because we want to continue to measure how important that is to club members, because like if 90% of club members, and I remember the club members value feedback more highly than non-club members, it's still worth it to do a lengthy, beefy feedback section because that's the people paying the bills, you know, like our advertising is such a fraction of our overall budget that like, I don't really care if I turn off a non-paying fan of a podcast because they're done with feedback, because the people that are paying the bills like the feedback. So, but that's why the survey is so vital. And it's good to see like our survey validating some of this data. It's like that there's not a lot of surprises because, you know, we get a couple thousand people fill out a survey. That's a pretty representative data sample, honestly. So the other reason that vendors crave podcasts is they know that we have this parasocial relationship on par, more like with a friend or a relative, and not like Harrison Ford telling you to buy a car is different than Jim and Aaron telling you to buy a car, because the way people perceive from ways that are measurable and the way they self-report is that they see podcast hosts more. You know, you've seen that picture of the kid that's like got a bowl of ice cream and he's sitting in front of advertising of 3 women that are eating a bowl of ice cream. And he's kind of like he's part of the scene and sharing, and people like, this is what a podcast is like. What listening to podcasts is like you feel like you're friends with me and Jim, right? But you're not really. You know, there's this one way of flow of intimacy. But because, you know, Harrison Ford, he doesn't read reviews, he doesn't read fan mail, he doesn't like, that's like an entirely one way. There is this. But I use the term parasocial relationship because that's essentially the study of like celebrity to fan engagement. And there's been tons of research about, you know, how unhealthy people can fixate on celebrities or give them undue influence. But in this new media environment, there's also some studies about like how that affects the media personality, because like Harrison Ford has to pretend to be Indiana Jones for 6 weeks out of a year every 10 years. Podcasters, YouTubers, Twitch personalities, we have to hold this like character that we're playing, even if it's a slight character. Like I've been thinking lately that like the version of me that I am on these podcasts is kind of like me sucking in my gut. Like
okay,
it's
good analogy.
me, but I'm putting the best version of me possible. I'm putting the most pleasant, the most agreeable, the most empathetic,
the most energetic,
the most entertaining and energetic version of me. Like this is the version of me that you would go out to a bar and drink with. But I can't maintain that for long stretches of time, but with feedback coming in all the time, with me trying to engage on the forums, with me it's a lot more than like an average celebrity that like goes and makes an appearance at a child's hospital and fucks off the Bally, right? Yeah. And like there's also like this might be an interesting empire business, because I started reading this because it reminded me the way you talked about podcasting, like the ephemeral drain it puts on you, that it's like hard to put into words. And I think I was reading this parasocial relationship stuff, and I'm like, well, this isn't, but I'm like, this things that they keep talking about remind me of the way Jim's talking about this, and it might be interesting to just talk, period. But like,
yeah, I guess I don't know enough about the parasocial stuff that you're talking about to really.
It's just like a social relationship is me and you. You and I have an actual friendship off camera where we talk frankly, and we have like I know intimate details of your life, you know intimate details of our life. A parasocial relationship is like that at a remove, where that like an idealized flow of information is going one way, but I'm not like, when Samantha from Butte, Montana or whatever listens to my podcast, like I don't know what's going on with her. I don't know that she's had a toothache for all week. I don't know that she's losing sleep because her mom's sick or something like that. But she knows that my grandfather died this year, and that we've had a snafu with the office, and now we're podcasting out of Jim's basement and stuff like that. So that's just essentially parasocial is just another word of saying something that apes a traditional social relationship, but the two-way flow of feedback doesn't work. And there's a lot of like information, like there's a lot of phenomenon about like YouTuber burnout and stuff like that, and it's essentially keeping this, however mild a front it is, keeping this front up essentially 24/7 like drains people. But the thing that's interesting from an advertiser perspective is it puts us closer into your inner circle, so we're even more influential.
Right.
And they want us to inject every bit of our personality and draw upon all of our trust that we have built with you to commit to their committee-driven ad copy, right?
Right. Do they actually want our personality? That's a good question.
Though they say they do, because they know. So this
That's the thing that
we're
sells
about to talk about the dichotomy, and now we're about to switch to our podcaster perspective, right? Because yes, you ask a ad exec, and they're like, absolutely, we want Jim and Aaron to sell the product because they have a unique relationship with their blah 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 blah. And it used to be, I mean, think about when we used to do ad reads 4 years ago, or even 2 years ago. You would get like 2 or 3 bullet points of like, hey, mention this, have a good experience with the product, and just talk about it. We're getting 4 and 5 pages of shit now.
Yeah.
And like mandatory, you must talk 2 bullet points from each of these sections, and you must do this, and you must do like, to the point where like I have to read 2 minutes of copy that's not phrased the way I would phrase it, that's not in the order, that's not the way that has no importance to my audience, because they're trying to shotgun everybody instead of appealing to a bald move audience. And unfortunately, they also like they're giving me 90 seconds to 2 minutes of copy to read. But then they say have fun with it and put in your personal experiences and all that. It's like, well, yeah, I just talked about your shit for 2 minutes, man. How long do you want this ad to be?
And that's why I say, do they actually want you to connect with your audience? Because their copy comes across as they want to get their message to your audience without your involvement.
Right.
At least like some companies.
I've been calling it like this handcuff copy, because like I get it and open up. I'm like, oh, great. I can extol these 7 virtues. And the other thing is it really chaps my ass is even a year ago, you listened to podcast ads across the internet and they had a lot of personality. And like, the way Bill Burr would pitch a Casper mattress would be radically different from the way Bald Move would pitch a mattress, which would be radically different from the way 538 would pitch a mattress, which is different from the way the Ringer. They all sound the same now. And that was the biggest bitch, is like at the podcast panels, is that like you say you want our unique relationship with our customer, but what you demand is this cookie cutter bullshit.
Yeah.
So like, which is it? You know, and that's the other thing, is like there's a lot of kind of anger in the podcast panels when they're talking about these stats and the vendors, and they're saying like, you know, you guys push this universal metric system so everyone plays on a level playing field, which is all well and good. But you also constantly have said through this whole process, hey, you guys aren't doing anything wrong. You're not reaching less people. You're not performing any less. But then why are our ad buys down by almost exactly the amount that we've lost in traffic due to the purely cosmetic stats change?
Yeah, you're talking about the caps, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's because it's funny because like I had to leave on an emergency basis to go pick up my kid from school, and so I'm getting this podcast an hour later than we intended to, but I was listening to Dan Harmon's podcast on the way to pick him up, and he was talking coincidentally about advertising. I'm assuming because everyone's getting this Nielsen stuff and everyone's getting these pitches and all that stuff. And he said, you know, when I first started podcasting, I thought, yeah, we're doing these hokey little reads, but eventually us podcasts will form together into networks, and we'll use our collective bargaining ability to get better, more fair reads and all that stuff. What I didn't see coming is all the advertisers caballing together and then dictating terms to us and saying, hey, you know, if you want to sell my underwear copy, you better be careful with the jokes, jokey man. And I'll be damned if he's not right, because, you know, we're just being held to these standards that no other form of advertising is being held to standards, while they're telling us that we're outperforming their conventional metrics, and it's just really frustrating.
Well, I mean, if you want to do the cookie cutter approach, produce your own ads, you know, like radio ads, like TV ads. If that's the cookie cutter
Harrison
approach.
Ford to talk about how fucking good a Casper mattress is.
Right.
And just let me roll it.
Yeah, there's this strange false flag of like, we want your voice, your authentic voice, and yet we don't want you to actually say the things that you want to say about our company. And it's
right.
I don't know. It's in a weird place right now, and I actually do think companies are going to start moving more toward the pre-read ads. Like just leave the podcasters out of it. Just insert these dynamic ads. It'll all be done.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably where it's going, and like
at least for the big
be a
companies.
Premium space for certain personalities,
right.
To the individual ad reads, but those will be at a premium. Like it's just like, you know, when Coke starts rolling the Polar Bear ads, podcast ads, I doubt it's going to be the CPMs that the other stuff is, but there should be a shit ton more of them.
Yeah, and I mean, Coca-Cola does not want Dan Harmon talking about how whatever he's sitting in his underwear drinking Coke. They do not want Dan Harmon advertising Coke, because he's not going to purvey the image that they're trying to purvey.
Or if they do want him to do it, they'll give him a script. So like, yeah, here's the funny guy from Rick and Morty, and he's going to make a Rick and Morty. He's going to wubble up a dub dub, drink a Coke. You know, it's not going to be his cockeyed horseshit take on it. You know,
right?
So the other thing that podcasters are starting to become more and more aware of is, like, in the olden days, like if Casper gave us a discount code, it was kind of like you know, we got like a 10% off with an exclusive code, and there weren't a lot of other other podcasts getting that same deal. Nowadays, and all this stuff, like, this is the Insider Podcast. This is where we talk about, like, I'm trying to give you straight dope, no bullshit. I don't have a problem with Casper. I'm just using them as an example. You could say Audible or Harry's, or, you know, some made up Peruvian coffee blend if you want. It's all the same. But you know, if every podcast out there is getting the same ad and the same discount, and the avid fans listen to multiple podcasts, one thing you could be worried about is, like, you know, people are virtuous, and they, you know, we've seen consistently that people, what influences people's decision on how they spend money on podcasts is how they feel about the host. And let's say, you know, I'm Bald Move and I'm slinging Casper mattresses, but the Bald Move fan is listening to a person that's further down the ladder, the rung of the ladder than we are, and they're doing a Casper ad. who gets the loyalty code when it comes time to buy a mattress? You know, like if and honestly, I think that's an ethical, cool thing to do. Like if you're like dividing, like, hey, I'm buying a mattress, I'm going to give it to the little guy. Well, that's great, but it is also kind of screwing the big guy because I'm providing much more reach, but it's like this weird altruism being marshaled against me. I heard that actually from the stage. They had like a couple of big podcasters and a couple of big advertisings, like having an open, honest, and that's something he said, like, you know, how do I know I'm not getting fucked on these promotions? Because everyone's got these same discounts. They're all the same. So why wouldn't somebody, I mean, that's what I would do, right? Like I would, if I had a choice between penny, like that's what I do with my Twitch Prime sub. I don't give it to Ninja. I don't give it to Doc. I give it to a little guy who's trying to get to that level, you know?
Yeah. Let me advocate for the devil here for a second.
Do it.
The big shows inherently reach far more people, right?
Yes.
So let's say, you know, you got Mark Maron interviewing the president. He reaches 1 million people. You got Bald Move TV, and we're reaching 7,000 to 10,000.
Right.
Only 7,000 to 10,000 of Mark Maron's audience would ever even know to go to Bald Move TV and sign up with our code because that would give us the advantage. So 990,000 other people only know of Mark Maron, right? Now, I understand, like in aggregate, maybe the small shows start to add up, and that, you know, a good portion of the people that he reaches might also listen to one of many other podcasts that are promoting that thing. But I think there's an inherent advantage there. And this is a slightly overblown problem because of the reach of the big guys. It's always going to be much, much, much larger than the small guys that you're talking about stealing their money.
Right. On the other hand, also, like, if we got away from this coupon, you know, referral code bullshit, and we just got paid for the exposure to the brand and exposure to the sales and deals, that would be inherently more fair because they're just paying for ears, right? You're not paying for performance. Because it's the other thing is, like, especially now that I got like, I firmly believe in every product that we push on Bald Move. I think it's a quality product, and if it offers the convenience and like a lot of them are honestly kind of luxury type things. Like if you're lower income, you're not going to do HelloFresh, but if you're middle class, it's kind of fun, and you're not good at cooking, and you work all the time, and you don't like going to the grocery store. I believe in that. I believe in Harry's razors. I think absolutely they're the better way to go than just buying overpriced Gillette shit at the stores. But, you know, it's tough on some of these vendors that I really like when they make me say stupid shit. And it's not untrue. It's just
no, but talking about their German factory, you know, that they set up for the 100th time is not really going to sell the audience.
Not on Bald, like especially because, like, you know, Bald Move, we're kind of smart asses and we kind of question authority and we take the piss out of things. And I'm now switching into earnest copy mode for these damn product XYZ. It sucks. So it's like it seems like there's a lot of upheaval in the market. Like everyone's complaining about the buys going down. It seems like there's we haven't got the big money spigot turned on, so everyone's fighting for the same, like an expanding market is fighting for the same piece of shrinking pie. But Bald Move is very well positioned to weather this storm and get to the other sunny side where we start doing more, like, you know, name brand recognition type advertising because of the club. Like, honestly, imagine if we had, like, half of our ad money came from ad revenue. And like we have another fucking Amazon debacle. We're like, okay, we thought we counted on this plus 25% accounting for growth next year, and we're actually going to get half, minus 25%.
Because the stats changed, and we couldn't have foreseen that. You know,
that was a big goal. I know we talked about it on the club, but like that was a big goal for Jim and I, is to build the club up to where we can succeed with nothing but that funding.
Yeah.
And we're at that, which is why we're really cautious about growth, because, you know, once you go on to the not sweet side of that equation, then it's like you're back in the hands of a third party. And eventually we're going to have to get some kind of trust, and it's probably going to involve financing and business plans and all this other stuff. But like, it is a good feeling knowing that as long as we don't piss off the Bald Move fans and the listeners and the people that are loyally supporting us, then we're going to be fine. That's a nice feeling. Now I want to talk about so the ray of light is that we, unlike a lot of other podcasts, have really spent because we haven't gotten ads. We've been advertising consistently at the club, and that's paid off, and that's a nice strategy. And so we can now weather this ad storm and maybe come out with some competition that's been forced out. And, now we've got a much bigger pie and there's fewer people trying to get at it. Maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll be on the dustbin of history, but like our plan seems to be working. Yeah. The other sunny part of this is Jim, when he was doing our traffic analysis to do like the cost benefit of moving off of because right now we got a Libsyn plan that they're not great on selling ads. We're not a high priority to them. And we're not great at selling ads ourselves, but we don't have to worry about running over any particular track. Like if Game of Thrones we pay the same locked in rate, whether Game of Thrones sells, moves 100,000 copies or 1 million copies, right? Because they take half of our advertising that we do get, and we're subsidized by all the people that are getting 200 downloads and they're paying $5-10 a month to Libsyn to do it, right? They're directly told this. Before, we've always done analysis of okay, if we paid for all this bandwidth ourselves, but we could keep 100% of our ad space, and we're freed from the non-compete clause, because we can't even sell to advertising vendors that have a pre-existing relationship to vendor. It's against our contract. Yeah. Suddenly, if we've been doing things thinking that we'd have to pay 4 times the bandwidth, and what we're seeing is, hell no, it's half to a quarter. Yeah. That really changes the math on stepping out and going to a plan where you pay as you go.
Yeah, I think
go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you looked at the advertising, I think it's in the advertising video, or maybe the State of the Union 2016, State of the Empire 2016. I went over the numbers there, right? And it was going to be like $100,000 to do all of the bandwidth for 2016 that we saw. But like you said, those were based on those inflated download numbers. So if we're talking about a quarter of that, 25 grand, could we cover that with advertising? Well, the answer is yes, we did last year. And also we covered that with a 50% cut of the advertising.
Right.
So we might be talking about, $80,000 in advertising and only $25,000 in hosting costs. That makes it much, much more attractive, because then we'd be keeping, $55,000 instead of $40,000.
Yeah. And it's funny because Jim and I are both personally financially conservative, because I actually think that's a winning strategy for individuals and families, is to be conservative as possible.
Absolutely.
Nation states, it's a different ball game. If I ever get a political podcast off the ground, I'll talk about it.
Companies probably as well.
We've always been afraid of if it looks like we're breaking even, it's well, what if we're wrong? Then we could jeopardize the future of Bald Move. We're feeling less man, how could we possibly lose? Because there's a lot of soft things. For example, we've always had trouble with Libsyn selling at capacity. That's foolish. If we had someone that is just essentially say, we don't know if Game of Thrones might be a bonanza for us next year, because we've got almost 8 months of heads up to give these fuckers time, and it's also right in where they told us where they need all the ads get sold September through November. We should just do a killing on Game of Thrones next year. If not, I'm going to drive down to Libsyn's headquarters and punch Rob in his arm. I'm gonna 6-inch punch him as hard as I can.
You also have to punch Cindy, because I think she's working with us too now. So,
But if we had a person in house that was freed, that could talk to any vendor and make these deals, and we could keep 100% of it, and maybe we could go low, we can entice people to lower CPMs and do custom. It's really hard. It starts to be hard to see how we couldn't at least break even, if not make a ton more money. And that's going to be super important when the money spigot does get turned on, Mm-hmm. But then again, if we get a person that for whatever reason can't sell ads, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of reward, and that's why it's so cool to have the club covering 100% of our expenses, because that allows us to be speculators on the ad thing that we're not very good at, right? So we talked about the implications if we went, because there's also Libsyn's starting to get a lot of competition. The big boys like Libsyn and Blueberry, are starting to get a lot of competition. There's a bunch of upstarts that are doing a lot more modern stuff that has advertising built in. There's a turnkey advertising solutions that I'm starting to reach out to and talk to.
Interstitials are becoming a thing now.
Yep, and like the big boys, you know, are now built up to the point where they're like entertaining smaller outfits like Bald Move, because that's the thing. Like Bald Move is anywhere from a mid-size to like a superstar, depending on which show we're covering. Like Game of Thrones, hell, we hit the #1 podcast on iTunes like 3 weeks last year during Game of Thrones season. It's incredible. But then, you know, Better Call Saul, and we're middle of the pack. So but those mid rolls and Pananoplies and stuff are starting to be more and more interested, and we're getting more and more offers to like go on there, and it's a deal for ads and all that stuff. But you guys just gotta be really careful and count all the costs and make sure that you're not signing too much of your legal rights away. The next step, I guess, that we should do, and this will probably be like in an Empire Business update that we do in the future, but the next thing we do is I think we need to do a complete stats analysis. As soon as we get access to the legacy stats being converted, we need to go back and do a cost accounting. We need to come up with a spreadsheet that allows us to put in traffic like month over month, year over year, and then put like, you know, cost for bandwidth transferred and like play around with different numbers. I'd like to get a spreadsheet to where when we're dealing with these companies, we can put in their CPMs, their, you know, penny per gigabyte fees, all that stuff, and rapidly see like at this level of traffic, at, you know, we're costing this and we're making this. Like that's probably something we need to do before we take this conversation much further, because I would really like to have the decision made by this time next year, and honestly, like by like May, so we can like if we want to go, we're going to have to hire someone like Joe, if he's still available, or someone like that to do this stuff. Because if you wait, you know, if you haven't got your ads sold by like end of October, mid-November, you're going to be fighting for scraps. So it's already too late for us to do something crazy this year, and I don't know that we have all of our eggs in a row for it, but like next year I'd like to make some more aggressive moves on this. I think you're with me on that, right, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's like, you know, you start thinking about the far future, it's like, you know, the market's ripe for like, could we become the ad broker for a lot of these like TV and film podcast community? Can we, like, you know, because I'm sure that if we have a full-time employee, they'll pay for themselves and they'll probably have more time. It's probably not a full-time job selling ads for Bald Move, but like if they sold for other, you know, like maybe we could help out other people and we could get a cut of that, and that could be a revenue stream. I mean, it'd be really cool to like, I mean, like if like Bald Move had a bald ad agency or something,
right?
You know, like Sterling Koo.
and you look at, I mean, the pattern here is that podcast networks go, oh shit, we're not selling enough advertising, we want to sell more. They start advertising. They start an advertising branch in-house, and then it spins off like mid-roll, right, from Earwolf. That seems to be the way to go, and I think Bald Move could do exactly the same thing. And it's funny that, or I guess it's interesting that you mentioned being kind of the TV podcaster ad agency, because it's a whole different kettle of fish, you know, like
you're right.
Trying to advertise on a seasonal basis is very, very different from trying to advertise a podcast that comes back once a week, every single week of the year. And so we would understand, you know, the individual TV problems that these podcasters would have. And I think the ad arrangements and the relationships we could forge with advertisers would be superior to anything that like a mid-roll or any of those guys could offer, because they're
right.
kind of cookie cutter in their approach too, you know?
Yeah, because they are well equipped to sell the Harmontowns, the Joe Rogan experiences, the WTS with Mark Maron, a show that's going to, you know, like it might bump up and down depending on the guest, but you got steady Eddie traffic every week. You ring the bell, the people download it. It's one show a week. It's so easy.
Yeah.
What we do is a lot harder because we are essentially an amalgam of 40 different shows that have widely different success ratios and wildly different audiences. They're all like, that's the other thing that's frustrating to me is like, we've seen the surveys, the demographics are almost identical across all of our shows.
Yeah.
Like there's not significant deviations in male, female, income. I mean, there's minor, There's little bits like if a window shifts here and there, but not enough to justify a completely different campaign. And that's the other thing is everybody's like, oh, well, we can't just sell like, you know, an average show because you don't have an average show. It might have a different audience. Motherfucker, I've never gotten Walking Dead specific copy. I've never gotten Game of Thrones specific copy. I make those changes despite you. So right. I just, every time I talk to our ad people, I feel like it's frustrating because I know we're an awkward beast, but it's like I'm really getting tired of the same old bullshit because it's one of those things where like your boss gives you a reason that he can't give you a raise, and it's like it sounds nice in the fact that it's a logically internally consistent argument, but like at the end of the day, I know what I'm worth, and I'm worth more than this, and we can do better. Like, you know, maybe I don't deserve a 10% raise, maybe I get a 7% raise, but I'm not getting a 3%, and I feel like I keep getting the 3% raise. I keep getting those 40-degree days from these guys.
Yeah,
and I'm fucking sick of it.
I think this is going to be a problem that only we can solve, frankly, and it's why the ad agency, as part of Bald Move, you know, in-house kind of stuff, excites me because I think this is going to take a lot of education of the sponsors themselves, right? The companies who are buying the ads need to be educated on how this all works from a TV podcaster's perspective, and that takes a lot of effort. And I don't think that the traditional is a funny word in a medium that's 20 years old. Right. I don't think the traditional advertising agencies within podcasting are willing to do the work to get there, right? Because
not when there's like, so much lower hanging fruit.
Exactly.
We are not the low hanging fruit.
And you know, we get 1 million downloads on a Game of Thrones, but we're gone in 2 months, you know? Yeah. Why are they going to change their business model and put in the effort to educate the advertisers if it's only going to affect we're the biggest fucking Game of Thrones show on the internet, and we're only around for 2 months. Yes, we get big numbers on those months, but it's not worth the money that they would have to spend and the time that they would have to spend to educate the sponsors in order to service us when they can just go out to Mark Maron. They can just go out to Crooked Media, who produce the same, you know, cookie cutter schedule that they're used to, and they can sell it like a breeze. So why would they do it?
See, I think you know, when you get national ad buys, they don't go and negotiate rates with like the local NBC affiliates. They talk to NBC, and then they like it gets like, you know, I know it's really complicated, but like it's not, you know, Coca-Cola's not calling Paducah and saying, hey, I want to get 5 minutes on 5 minutes over 6 slots on this week's game, okay? And I feel like that's the answer for us. Like, we would sell a block of X amount of ears and divvy that up amongst all the Game of Thrones podcasts. So everybody gets that exposure, and they get this like, you know, this blanket kind of advertisement. The same way you see the same Chevy ad on CBS's NFL game pregame show as Fox's, as ABC's Monday night. Like they don't do a custom campaign for that fucking network, even though the demographics are probably slightly different. I feel like we can bring that kind of same sensibility. Like, you know, like it's so fucking weird because this shit's been solved. Like seasonal content is all television has, right?
No, I mean,
no one applies it to the parasitical business of commentary.
Right. I mean, this is the great thing about podcasting too, is you could take, you know, that concept of football, and the demographic watching football is all basically the same. So we're going to go NBC, CBS, ABC. We're going to give them all, we're going to buy ads on all of it, you know, and give them the same ad. Now, podcasting has the advantage of being able to custom tailor the ad to not just the topic, but also the specific audience who's connecting with the advertiser or the person delivering the ad, right? So you get even more specific. You get a demographic that you know loves Game of Thrones, and then you get it pitched to them by their favorite host. So like you've got the best of both worlds packaged in there. It's just a matter of education. And I look at like, you know, the people doing the standard podcast advertising stuff, and they say it took a long time, right? The problem was the education, getting the advertisers to understand that podcasting is a viable advertising medium. And we need to do the same with an ad agency for Bald Move or TV podcasting. We would have to do the same legwork, which they're not willing to do yet.
I also think there's opportunities. Like one of the reasons like that more and more of these cable broadcasters are coming up with apps is because, you know, you watch an FX show, it's free, but you're going to watch several commercials. And unless you've got some kind of fancy ad blocking software, whitelist, I mean, there's all ways to get around anything. But if you're just your Joe consumer, or Joanne consumer, you watch the ads. I even watch the ads because it's not worth me to try to fuck with my Roku box to bypass it, like whatever.
Right.
I am guessing that they like one of these days, iTunes and Google are going to decide, look at all of this monetization we can make on the podcast side. We're going to build in turnkey, just like YouTube, just like Twitch. We're going to have built-in advertising that the people can't skip. You know, the days of 2-minute ad reads for the Cash App are numbered. Like, there's no way this industry can continue to grow with that style of advertising and that style of engagement, because even on the like, it's got, here's the thing, like, there's a couple of podcast networks that I used to listen to the ads for, and less I do because they're less and less funny and unique. Like, they're killing the golden goose by this handcuff ad copy and the fact that they run the same damn campaign for a quarter at a time. Like, I can like I listen to Crooked Media Boys, and they're just like, what, you know, some of these ad reads, like, what do we do? What do you say that you haven't already said about this fucking movement watch? And that's the other thing. We're way more discriminating about the types of ads we take on. Like, we've turned down over half of the ad slots because we have philosophical opposition to it, or we have like, let's name some names and talk about this. This is the Insider Podcast. 4Hims.
Oh, right. Yeah.
We were one of the first ones approached to sell 4Hims product. If you don't know, 4Hims claim to fame is they sell hair loss products like Rogaine type stuff. But they do, like, you know, they do it, they package these in attractive looking products. So like, if your girlfriend comes over and you don't want to know that, like, you're on Rogaine every day because you're losing your hair, then it just looks like a shampoo bottle, and it smells nicer, and it's got conditioner built into it. They're essentially, you know, making like these hair loss products more attractive and more commercial. They're more expensive than the Rogaine, but you're paying for the brand and the conditioner and all that kind of stuff. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But they want you to give a personal experience. And I know that, like, Rogaine and minoxidil and those other chemicals, they will keep the hair on your head if you start using it right away, but they can't regrow hair. They just, there's very little evidence that they do anything but like they just don't.
They prevent hair loss, not restore.
Right. So if I started using that shit when I was 27, and by the way, if you're in your mid 20s and you're starting to lose your hair, fucking get on this shit, man, because it does work. It will keep the stuff you've got. But and that's important to you, because the other way is you just lose your hair. We've been doing it for millennia. Who gives a shit? That's a decent product, but like, I didn't like the fact that they're really pressuring me to give a testimonial, because like, they wanted me to do like, or ad read to be like, and yeah, I used it for 6 weeks and I can tell I've got new hair growth or stuff, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. And then they also had this other product where, you know, I guess they decided that one of the reasons the more men would buy Viagra if they didn't have to suffer the embarrassment of going and talking about their boner to their personal doctor. So one of the features they have is you can call to a doctor on the internet, and they will give you an internet diagnosis and prescribe you boner pills that then 4Hims will sell to you. And I think that's, honestly, it's just so weird, because like, I had a problem with the hair thing, and I think Jim had a problem with you were just skeeved out of the whole internet doctor thing, and like, you know, prescribing a vasodilator for a boner and you haven't had your blood pressure taken. Like, that's, I mean, to me, that's.
I mean, it felt like the equivalent of going to your doctor and saying, "Hey, I saw this commercial about this medication. I want it." Right. It felt like that, and I hate that.
Yeah. So like, we passed on that. There's a bunch of vitamin supplements that, I mean, I think taking vitamins is fine, but for the majority of healthy people that have a decent diet, they don't really bestow the benefits, and they're not FDA. Like there's this loophole where you can say they do whatever they want, and there's no standards. And like, it's fine, and I'm sure we'd make money on it, but it's just not consistent with what, I mean, it's like, you can only sell out once. You can only sell out your principles once, and I don't ever want to do it. Like the whole reason we, like people all the time ask us, like, how do you get this club to work, and how do you, it's like it's because we've always tried to be honest with people and principled, and I think that's like our brand. If anything, is like we're good guys and we're not trying to fuck you.
Right.
Like,
I think that's a good brand to have. I'm proud of that brand.
Yeah, and there's nothing like we're making $19,000 average on the club. What ad campaign would possibly be worth making someone feel bad about supporting us because they're squicked out by the stuff that we're selling? And I think we've also cultivated the kind of audience would call us on that bullshit. Like you should have seen like Star Talk Radio when they started selling like homeopathic shit.
Yeah,
people lost their fucking minds. How is a show that Neil deGrasse Tyson on selling literal snake oil?
Rightfully
not literal
so.
Snake oil, but metaphorical snake oil.
One of the other things we passed on is vaping and e-cig products as well.
Right.
And I don't know that we took like a huge philosophical stance against that. It was more we had data.
Broadly speaking,
it's certainly better than smoking. I am pro vaping if you are a smoker trying to quit. That's an excellent use case.
There you go.
But one of the things that we knew from our surveys is that our audience was particularly uninterested, let's call it, in vaping and cigarette products.
Yeah, like the things that like were greater than 50% disapproval were essentially vaping and adult novelties.
Yeah. Which is strange because I think we're
surprised about the adult novelties.
Yeah, we're pretty like open about talking about that stuff. So
what it is I think society, like, we joke about it, but it's kind of like a joke. Like society's just not ready to talk about dildos and fleshlights and quote unquote marital aids. Like the vast majority, like so many people use these things. And there's less and less stigma, but until we hit that critical level where people are ready to like it's even fairly rare to get like a condom advertising on the radio. And I don't think I can ever think of a condom advertisement on television. Why? Are we not having sex? We're not using
I've certainly
condoms?
seen Trojan stuff on the TV.
You've seen on TV? Because I've seen on radio. I don't. But do you see what I'm saying? It's like the near ubiquity of that product in use from the time you're 18 to 35 or whatever. Like there's remarkably little advertising. It's all because people just aren't comfortable with it. So like that's just an American thing. What are you going to do? But there's been a bunch of stuff, and there's been other things like personal endorsements for a particular thing that we just kind of passed on because it's like we just want like. Again, there's stuff like I think Casper's an excellent bed for the money. And the fact that you can try it for 100 days free is a hell of a feature. Now, there's a bunch of other mattress companies that are probably just as good, but we've done with Casper brung us and we've been dancing with them. The Away luggage, I think Away luggage is fucking awesome. Yeah. Especially for the money. It's expensive luggage, but like you compare it to other high-end like equivalent products, and it's just really good product. Like everything that we sell, I actually believe in. I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think everyone can afford it, but the products do what it's like Walter White said. They're safe, effective. They do what they are advertised, and they're not adulterated, and there is no scummy bullshit in it.
I think there's like a two-level, like a two-layer process when I go to evaluate an ad. It's am I personally offended by the very product itself? And also, once we say, okay, we're interested in this, send us an example product, we review the product, we use the product, most importantly, and if we're not satisfied with it, I think we turn it down. Right.
So I don't know, maybe we should loosen it, because like I said, I think that, like, if I was a 26-year-old losing my hair, and, I was dating a lot, and sometimes a girl would take a shower at my place, I would go for that for him stuff, because I'm one though, like, that's the reason I actually started Rogaine when I was like 30. And I did it for like 3 months, and I'm like, I just hate this shit. It stinks. It feels greasy. I don't like it. Like a better version of that smelled good, that I could use in my shampoo every day. Like that's a great product, but I'm not going to sit there and use it and say, but maybe I'm looking at this wrong. Like I don't have to say it grew hair. I can say, hey, this is a product that I know clinically proven will work and do what it says. And it also smells decent. Like that would be something maybe we're gotten the right. Maybe Yeah, I don't know. It seems like you're just like a hard no on the like I'm more pro everything legal being drugs. And if I had an adult with a medical degree that said, "Hey, this is a vasodilator. You shouldn't take it if you have high blood pressure. Your boner's not worth your life." Well, I feel like an adult should be able to make that goddamn decision. And also, I don't think that's that dangerous. Like even abusing Viagra is not going to put a death on my conscience. I don't think. But like it's got to be both of us on it, right? We can't just like, oh, well, Jim will do this ad and Aaron will just shut up and everyone will, it's like we're a package deal. So
yeah,
that's the other thing that we probably would have had 2 times the ads, but we have turned down a lot of new vendors this year. But I wanted to talk about that because it's, behind the scenes and, hopefully it's appreciated.
Yeah, I actually sent you a couple today to evaluate. One of them is like a men's health kind of thing, which can be dubious.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, it's all about will it work?
Yeah.
And is there not just will it work like anecdotally? Like if I take a boner pill and it gives me a boner, like where is the double-blind scientific trials? Where is the FDA safety? Where is the rigor to that product? And the same thing with like the it's much easier on a piece of luggage. Like, does it hold your shit? Does it charge your phone? How does it roll? Like all that kind of stuff. But like the medical stuff and the nutrition supplements and stuff like that, like, it's easy for HelloFresh, like fresh ingredients, they're fresh ingredients. Recyclable packaging, easy 30-minute one-pot meals, all I can verify. Vegetarian options, I can verify. If they wanted me to say that it's the best chicken in the world, I'd start to be like, huh. And I tell you what, I don't like, one of the vendors started having us say terms and conditions apply.
Yeah. That's scary.
That's like, why the fuck is that in there? Everyone knows terms and conditions apply, but what did I just say that someone might be fucked over on a return policy because they fell afoul of the term and condition? Like, I don't like that. And, it's like, I don't know. There's like truth in advertising, but you can get ridiculous where like, I don't think this is still a thing, but like in the 90s, like it became a joke that like car manufacturers would have this like high speed, this thing is a closed blah, and now it's like tiny micro text that no one can even read. But like, what value is that warning actually giving now? Like no one reads it. You're inured to it. It came from an honest, good place in society. But like, I don't like. I guess I'm like I'm more of like, do what you say you're going to do and take care of the customer like you say you're going to take care of, and everything else will work out.
And that's what I think, when you say our brand is honesty, our brand is the trust that we build with our listeners. I think we also extend that to the advertisers we work with. If they don't exude the same brand, then we're not interested in working with them. Right.
Yeah. And we have to also, there's a lot, I know we look at vendors a hell of a lot more closely than most other podcasters do, because we try to like Google and see like what if there's anything negative being said about it. Did the CEO just rape a woman? Did are they dumping toxic chemicals in some Chinese river that's killed a village? Like, because I don't, it's funny because I remember there was a lady who always expressed disappointment that we were doing the Amazon affiliate stuff.
Right.
Because of Amazon's labor practices and stuff. And sometimes I feel a little bad because, as I've read more and more and I've looked at the situation, it does seem like there's some shady stuff going on there. And like, it doesn't feel good to know that we took a lot of money from Amazon and promoted that service on a purely beneficial, beneficial way without talking about like, I don't know, because I've got things I've had like problems with this Prime service, and I'm kind of like pissed at Amazon on a steady state basis. But like, I was just saying, like, I don't ever want to look back and think like, boy, I knowingly supported a company that doesn't live up to the standards that I set for my own. Yeah. So that's about all I got to talk about. It's actually a lot. I thought this would be like an easy breezy 20-minute thing, but we had a lot more to say.
We did, apparently.
So is that it?
Yeah, I think
so. We're done with this. We got this in. So thanks for listening to this Empire Business Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm not sure which sequence this is and how many are left, but again, we aim to have these at every Monday. And we've got 6 to 8 topics depending on what we end up doing. And we'll have another one out next week unless this is the last one, and then on to the next piece of seasonal content. Thank you for supporting the club. I hope you found this informative. and we'll see you on the next one. Until then, I'm Aaron.
I'm Jim.
Bye-bye.